Chapter 32. High above the sea, towering over serene white sand and crashing azure waves, a great lighthouse loomed mightily in spite of its aging dominance. Though weathered, its structure proved sound, and with exhausting dread Gabranth docked his Arcadian ship near its peak, safely out of sight of the straw on the banks below. There had been a day that such a mission would arouse in him such anger that he might struggle to follow his orders, but apathy had taken the whole of him now, and he wished only for it to end. Half of him hoped he might die this night, but the other half eagerly awaited his return to Arcades, if only for one reason. His careless complacency as of late notwithstanding, he had found it difficult to leave the imperial palace. He had hesitated for a moment, wondering if Lamont was too old now, but then decided that he wasn't and asked, as always, "Will you be good while I'm gone?" His assumption had been correct, for the boy smirked mischievously and replied, "Absolutely not. That's my boy." A pat on the head, and they parted, a routine that he hoped would instill in him the will to live through this ordeal. No amount of grief could lead him from Monty without a proper final farewell, he felt sure of it. And yet the dreadful silence that awaited him in the highest chamber of the tower seemed an omen of death so strong that he barely set foot in the stone archway before turning and heading back out to the ledge overlooking the sea. The fresh air did him good, and he saw no reason to mill about in the shadowy lighthouse when the princess with whom he was to negotiate had not yet even reached the top. While he gazed out at the blue expanse, however, the princess in question, along with her cortege, now heavy a third pirate, scaled the derelict stone stairways of the aged tower, eyes ever upward to the lightless peak above. Shimmering blue stone surrounded them, cut with expert precision, though clearly predating the tools that could achieve such accuracy. Luminescent veins of magicite snaked through each brick, a higher concentration per cubic inch of stone than even the most prized Boucherban mines, lending a dull, ethereal glow to the entire structure. An odd sense of foreboding pervaded the atmosphere, heightened by the faint echoes that seemed to trail listlessly from one passageway to another. The hazy light against the dim stone sent a flutter through the shadows every so often, never failing to startle Penello, and sometimes Vaughn, and occasionally exposing the mist where it hid in the darker corners of the tower. Little could be divined of the building's origin, for though it appeared man-made, there lingered about it the same unnatural aura that had enveloped the immense stone maze at Giruvegan, as though this tower represented a great meeting of the two cultures, a melding of their wisdom and power, while at the same time a struggle between them over influence or perhaps simply presence and Evilise. Whichever it truly was, both possibilities seemed quite unsettling to the group, and they stuck close together as they explored. On occasion, Balthier would grow still and quietly survey the area, much like a deer sensing predators beyond its sight, and Ash, too, seemed to prowl the shadows, alert to all echoes whose origins eluded her. Vaughn took Penello by the wrist if ever she began to wander too far from his side, and while she seemed irritated by this, she more often than not found herself drawing back close to him for fear of some shady silhouette or unknown sound in the distance. Bosch and Redes seemed relatively unmoved by the eerie surroundings, however, for they placed their faith in Fran's ability to hear what they could not. She remained undaunted, and thus so did they. Presently, though, her ears unfurled slightly, widening in search of some sound she could in no other way perceive. Seeing the futility in her attempts, she ceased them and continued on without a word, Balthier at last coaxing from her an explanation. "What is it?" "The din of the mist grows greater," she noted, faintly wrinkling her nose. "The sun Christ must be near." "Will it be safe for you?" Redes questioned. "I think so," she said slowly, though I fear I am no safer than any of us. Hey, Vaughn added, if you go at it like you did on the Leviathan, this should be a piece of cake. We can only hope, Fran replied with a faint smirk. Though the others found his optimism a relieving source of amusement, Ash seemed slightly disturbed by his words, thinking back to their misadventures aboard the Leviathan, and indeed, all of the trouble they had met as of late. She turned her eyes upward, looking gracefully over the gently glowing stone, unaware that the rich blue of the light vitalized her grey irises, washing them with crystalline beams of cerulean. The Leviathan, she said slowly. Seems so long ago. Yet, Penelo added. I can't believe we've only been at this a month. Balthier tossed his head dubiously. Speak for yourself. I can't believe I've stuck around this long. I suppose the price is right, said Fran. And God knows the scenery changes, he replied. Their jesting had little effect on the princess, who continued walking at a steady, nonchalant pace, melancholy softening her voice. A lot has happened. Redas suppressed a sigh. For better or for worse, I take it. The last 2 years passed so slowly, she explained. Now time moves faster than I can use it. Vaughn nodded, his expression growing distant. Sometimes I feel like I've just seen Rex yesterday, he said quietly. But then I remember everything that's happened since then, it doesn't seem real, you know. Sometimes it seems too real, Bosch agreed. Either way, I wish it would stop. I don't know which is worse, said Penelo. I mean, I don't want to be haunted, but I don't want to forget, either. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can see them so clearly. Illusions of the past, Redas added, the strength of his voice echoing against the staircase they ascended. You think you have cast them off, only to find them years later, unwearying, unrelenting. The past can bind a man as surely as irons. I was afraid of that, Balthier sighed. Penelo, a few steps ahead of the others, stepped on the platform at the end of the stairs and let out a joyous shout, along with a girlish leap. We're here! Really? Vaughn asked, dashing up beside her. Finally! Penelo's voice softened then as the others joined her, looking around the circular chamber with weary disinterest. There's no mist. Indeed, the room stood quite starkly empty, the square hole hewn in the center of the floor where the stairs met their destination the only entrance or exit, save for the arched walkways stretching from floor to ceiling all around the edges. Beyond these laid a continuous ledge, expansive, covered in moss, providing an immaculate view of the bejeweled ocean, as well as the last rays of the setting sun behind it. The columns of the archways supported a domed ceiling, sturdily built, but old enough to warrant a bit of concern. Fran stepped away from the group, ears alert and tail twitching slightly, but her eyes scanned the room with little alarm. I know it is here, she said faintly, the others watching her intently. I've never felt mist like this. Perhaps it is not mist. Not mist? Vaughn asked, trailing after her. Here. She halted, long limbs still, but not rigid. It comes from here, I think. Not mist, but the beginnings of mist. How can that be? Ash replied, walking slowly to meet them, toes gentle against the ancient stone. Isn't mist always mist? I thought it couldn't be created or destroyed. The others followed behind her, Balthier nearing her side.
I suppose if it can be transferred, it can be transformed. Don't tell that to Sid,
Redas replied. Ash stepped forward to closer inspect the spot which seemed to so intrigue Fran, but as she laid her foot down, the stone beneath it shifted, scraping against others, which in turn lowered themselves mechanically and slid out of sight. Vaughn took the princess's hand to steady her as the others backed away from the gap in the floor, and slowly a dark pedestal of ornately carved stone rose from the darkness, spinning gently, the floor gradually closing around its base until at last all movement ceased. Atop the pedestal, flashing with the subtle effulgence of mist, sat an irregularly oval-shaped stone, considerably large and hewn at one end. It shone white and milky, clear around the edges, like a shard of quartz, and structured and opaque in its depths, not too very unlike selenite. The surface flickered unusual colors in ways that reminded Ash of the Adel Aria pendant she had worn on her wedding day, yet something dark and colorless undulated at the stone's center, sometimes writhing and quivering, sometimes motionless and dead. Vaughn had released the princess once she found her footing, and she now stepped tepidly toward the sun crest, the others closing in behind her, surrounding the pedestal. Their eyes had uniformly grown round with marvel, but this quickly turned to skepticism and then to fear.
It pulses,
Fran noted deftly. None of the humans could detect this, but the minute movements of light across the cryst's surface lent an air of life. The cloudy center turned murky for a moment, and then fell still.
It's huge,
said Vaughn.
Little wonder they keep it secluded in the sea,
Redas added.
That much nethysite could founder a continent.
It seemed near to the size of an infant, perhaps a little larger. The film of quartz-like clear stone that encased it appeared to grow slowly over the blunt cuts taken from it, closing an ancient wound little by little over generations of sleep. Redas had ceased his advance a few paces away, unwilling to draw too near to the stone, and Balthier had halted but a few steps closer. Fran had dared to inspect it briefly, but she now returned to the periphery, masking her intimidation with her usual calmness. Vaughn and Penelo followed her, gathering with the others, while Bosch remained a step behind Ashalia.
Princess?
Vaughn asked at length. He received no answer, and Bosch, showing the first signs of discomfort, spoke in a slightly patronizing tone.
We shouldn't linger here, Highness. Take it or destroy it.
Ash remained motionless, staring into the depths of the great rock, watching intently as the light within it stirred back into action. The faint murmur of her name resumed, but the sun crest, unlike the midlight shard, called to her in a familiar voice. After a moment's consideration, she recognized it as her father's, but it melded then into her mother's. Shaking her head, she took a step back, and the voice changed yet again as she drew Garon's sword, intent on dividing the crest and returning to the straw with it in pieces. Though she could not place the new voice, she found herself pausing for a moment, stricken half dumb with awe. King Wraithwall once stood in that very spot. With that same sword, he cut the sun crest and took the power of the would-be gods in his own mortal hand. And yet, he did all this in the name of peace, or so she thought. The past remained hidden from her now, the truth distorted. As she stood, however, even the present blurred, for a hazy image of Rasslor manifested before her, at first dim and wavering, but increasing in strength until he seemed as real as any of the companions who now stood at her back. At last recognizing his voice, she suppressed a gasp and raised the sword slightly, though not high enough to strike. Behind her, Fran shook her head.
The mist!
She groaned. Ash turned to her, as did the others. Mist crawled in faintly along the floor, cool and wet, but thin and transparent, carpeting the ancient stones and magnifying their delicate glow. The flicker of magicite reflected upon the gentle clouds of condensation, creating a translucent, silvery pool of mirages that cunningly overtook the floor.
"All right?"
Balthier asked, knowing better than to show too much concern. Fran widened her stance slightly, steadying herself and flexing her ears attentively.
"It's Yode,"
she said, her voice wary and quiet.
"Or the voice of the wood. I cannot tell." "You hear that, too?"
Penelo asked. Ash's eyes grew sharp, and she struggled to curb her severity as she turned to Penelo.
"You hear it?"
The girl seemed to shrink, tears welling in her eyes, magnifying the depth of their blue. Drawing her shoulders in and forcing her gaze to steady, she answered her princess in barely a whisper.
It's Rex. It's like he's trying to find us."
Vaughn added, stepping to his sister's side. Looking over her companions, Ash saw in each of them the damaged expression of pain she felt certain she herself displayed. She could not venture to guess how the Nethicite struck so deep or why it stooped to such methods of persuasion, but the power and skill with which the stone manipulated those who would wield or destroy it drove a chill through her core that awoke emotions she had thought long slain. The same terror glinted in the eyes of all the others, and she strengthened her voice in hopes of assuaging their fear.
"We're all hearing something, aren't we?"
she said. Each of them shifted then, eyes averted and expressions vulnerable. Balthier hardened his countenance, however, glancing to his side as though perturbed.
"Perhaps you should try answering it,"
he suggested flatly. Turning to the sun crest once more, Ash studied the play of light on its surface, gripping the hilt of her Aquarian blade, but not daring to raise it. The churning mist that enveloped the pedestal on which the stone sat altered its shape slightly, reconstituting itself into Rastler's visage, pale, fluttering, occasionally mirroring her own likeness.
"What do you want from us?"
she asked, low-toned and commanding. The image wavered, the voice whispering her name as though from a distance.
"Revenge can't solve anything. There's no justice in this."
The stone's faint call faded suddenly as a stronger voice answered her, thickened with a slight metallic echo and weighted by a Landesian accent.
"Why do you hesitate? It was meant for you, take it."
She spun, knuckles white and teeth clenched, facing her father's murderer as he advanced from behind her comrades.
"You?"
she breathed coarsely.
"I haven't come to stop you,"
he assured her.
"Go on, princess. Why not make the rightful Kingslayer the first target of your vengeance?"
Seeing her approach the judge with taut, anxious steps, Bosch grounded himself between them, and addressed his brother with a low growl,
"Stay away from her." "It's her right, isn't it?"
Gabranth countered.
"Hers alone,"
said Bosch.
"Then we're both out of line. Nice to see you free of your chains, by the way. If only I could say the same of you."
At this, Gabranth drew his sword, prompting Ash, now standing at her knight's side, to raise her own in reply. Bosch gripped her forearm tightly, forcing the point of her blade to the ground, but he said nothing, gleaning a look of almost pleading curiosity from her.
"You'll need more anger than that,"
the judge said with a faint laugh. Now Redas, too, stepped in with sword drawn.
"Do not heed him, Majesty,"
he told Ashalia.
This is no choice to be made out of rage.
Gabranth cocked his head, studying the pirate before him with gracious familiarity.
Zect, of all places to turn up. It's been too long, Gabranth,
Redas replied with a grin. Ash turned to Bolthir.
You said Zect was dead. He is,
he replied calmly, nearing her side opposite Bosch.
So is Femrin. And to think they still call you cowards,
Gabranth added.
Forgive me, Princess,
Redas pleaded.
But you would never have trusted me had I been honest. And would it be too much to ask it of you now?
She shot back. Shaking his head with a dismal sigh, he obliged.
2 years passed, I took the Dawn Shard, stolen from Nabradia, and used it not knowing what I did. Nabudis was blown away, and I swore never to let such terrible power be used again. Then you've come to make my decision for me, have you?
Ash sneered.
You've already made it,
he replied.
Nonsense,
said Gabranth.
Did you not swear revenge, Highness? Do the dead not demand it?
Redas stepped ahead of the princess, unwilling to let her come to blows with a hound of the Empire.
Remember, Lady Ash, that which you must grasp is something beyond revenge, something greater than despair. Greater than common sense.
Gabranth mused.
Violence has no further purpose in this war,
Redas insisted.
We can reach peace by way of strength no more than we can reach love by way of hate. What's past is past, and no act of vengeance now will lessen the pain of it. Try as we might, Gabranth, history's chains bind us too tightly.
The ring of steel echoed through the dark stone chamber as their swords at last made contact, and it seemed then that the sun crest glowed faintly, lighting the mist at their feet. The mist in turn grew opaque, a slow transformation that served to better light the circular room, as the shine of the crest reflected off its surface, replacing the now sunken sun. Vaughn and Penelo neared the princess protectively, Fran remaining solitary, rubbing her temples. Bolthir shook his head.
It's just not the same when everybody's sober. We may not be able to escape the past,
Gabranth told Redas,
but we must live with it. If she would decide by your will, she would be forever doomed to live with hers.
Suddenly, a third blade swung between the two, breaking their contact and throwing the judges each back a step. Bosch stood his ground between them, though still wary of the princess's safety, and spoke in the tone Noah had so effectively used on him since childhood.
Then you force her to choose between hatred and cowardice.
Ash briefly turned her eyes to the floor in dejection.
Bash. Just ignore them, Ash,
Penelo added, taking the princess's arm in hers.
This is your decision. Whichever path you follow,
Bosch assured her,
you will not walk it alone.
Ashalia's eyes lowered, grayer than usual, and she placed a hand on Penelo's. The girl still clung to her supportively, even as she turned back to face the accursed stone that throbbed imperceptibly with power. The blurred, transparent likeness of Prince Rassler gazed back pleadingly, but she met his eyes for only a second. At her other side stood Vaughn, and she found his presence at first oddly comforting, and then mysteriously profound. Surely he had lost no less than he and Penelo had suffered every misfortune that befell Dalmasca, yet to them the choice proved simple and clear. And suddenly she became aware of the third blade, the sword of a Dalmascan knight strapped to her back. How it had lost its position at her side, she could not remember, but now its purpose seemed all too clear. A decision to aid her country could only be deemed right if made holy, duty allowed no room for fractional success. After all, Azelis had taught her to fight for herself. Glancing over her shoulder briefly, she noted that the twins stood poised, each equally desperate, but divided in their hopes. Redas appeared stony, racked with guilt and determined to bend her to his will, and Fran seemed to waver, dizzy, her face drawn with fatigue and dismay, wondering how humans could falter at the hands of such decisions. Only Bolthir, it seemed, held no interest in her choice. He stood a pace or two from her side, and would no matter what she did. Meeting his eyes for a moment, she parted her lips subtly, but could find no words, and he responded with only a slight tilt of his head. She had thought herself a pillar of virtue worthy of her people's pride, but the way her very heart vacillated betrayed the faith she had always had in the soundness of her morality. By making either choice, she felt for certain that she would forever be haunted by the possibilities of choosing otherwise. She turned once more to her prince. Their time had been short, their relationship unorthodox, their love decidedly limited, but never had they been strangers, not even in their earliest days, and she knew that it was not Raslur who stood before her now. Her Raslur would not beckon reckless violence in the hope of avenging ills dealt in the past, and he certainly would not place his trust in selfing beings of arrogant demeanor and questionable origins. The Raslur she had known, the prince, the soldier, nearly her own brother, was not the kind to sacrifice freedom for security, not the kind to take base revenge. Ash approached the pedestal, leaving Vaughn and Penelo behind, and spoke in a crestfallen whisper,
"The Raslur I knew is gone."
Raising the sword, she sliced through the hazy image, and in an instant it faded, dissipated like smoke. She sheathed the blade.
"I am no false savior for you to use."
The stone released a piercing chime that cast the mist back from its pedestal, and Ash, too, stepped away from it warily, but silence then descended upon the dark chamber. A low light reverberated in the sun-cryst's depths, and it slowly returned to its throbbing glow, the mist wafting back inwards and settling into place. Though the princess's cortege met her gaze with unified relief, her heart yet remained unconvinced, and she kept her eyes sharply trained on Gabranth, who seemed to leer at her the way a tethered dog regards a cat just out of his reach.
"You underestimate Vane's ambition,"
he stated calmly. She balled her fists.
"I won't let my country be tainted by the same power that conquered it. What good is a kingdom you cannot defend?"
Bosch shifted a bit, facing his brother with an assured stare.
"I will defend Queen and kingdom both."
At this, the judge suppressed a huff of doubt.
"You who failed Landis and Nubradia? Your oaths poison those you would protect." "At least he tried."
The words came from Vaughn, who now stood beside Ashalia once more, blue eyes trained steadily on Gabranth in spite of his obvious volatility.
"What gives you the right to talk about failure when you tucked tail and surrendered at the first sign of disappointment? He did what needed to be done, and you just gave up." "Vaughn?"
Penelo warned. Gabranth glowered at him, his resentment palpable even while masked by steel, but his tone conveyed acceptance of the accusation, which unsettled the others even more.
"Would you have your princess do the same?"
he asked.
"If she refuses to do what is necessary to win this war, she sacrifices all right she's ever had to defend her people, she's given up on them for the sake of keeping her own hands clean. She's not trying to win this war,"
Vaughn insisted.
"She's trying to end it. Wiping out Arcadia wouldn't accomplish anything. What would change? We can't help anyone now. Rex, Raslur, the king, they're all dead. Killing more people isn't going to fix that. And allowing Arcadia's injustice to stand without reproof,"
the judge replied.
"What good will that do Dalmasca? Even if you would not see the dead avenged, don't the living deserve closure? I want to free my country,
said Ash, tone resolved but succumbing to weariness.
And I certainly want to punish the Empire, but causing new suffering will do nothing to alleviate what's already been suffered.
Turning her gaze downward to focus with sullen regret on her hand, she took the midlight shard from her pocket, and continued resignedly,
The power of Nethysite might grant me rule of the whole world over, but it can't change what has passed. What's done is done.
The stone rolled out of her slender fingers, dropping into the shallow layer of mist that blanketed the floor and tumbling toward Gabranth with a dull echo. He shook his head slightly, noting the gentle surge in the sun-cryst's light.
Don't do this, princess.
His voice sounded injured, sensitive.
The world has seen what Arcadia is capable of, they will follow whatever leader dares stand against the Empire. You and your uncle can do what Landis couldn't.
Retta stepped in yet again, eyes fierce but expression sedate, addressing Ashalia rather than continuing to argue with Gabranth.
True, countries will rally to you, but they will trust you to win their freedom. Nethysite may crumble an empire, but it will surely build another in its place. You have made the right decision. Walk away while you can.
Ash seemed younger, her expression childlike and weak.
Please, stop. You cannot walk away from your only chance at liberty,
Gabranth insisted.
What of your broken kingdom's shame? What of your husband's needless death?
Retta's countered quickly.
Your husband?
Gabranth scoffed.
Better yet, what of your father?
He sheathed his sword and slowly stepped forward.
I took your king. I took your country. Do what you must, princess. You know I deserve it.
Ashalia edged back, her heart leaping as he neared.
Stop. Stop. It's too late for that. We've both come here for the same reason, to take what we've rightfully earned.
She shook her head.
And neither of us will have it. For 2 years, you've been so eager to kill me.
For a moment, he sounded truly honest.
Why relent now?
Her hands quivered in spite of their self-inflicted grip, and she choked on the fury of her words.
Because I understand you.
At this, his breath stilled, and his head tilted in puppy-like bewilderment. All fell silent, the mist muffling even the sounds of their breath, and Ash felt as though she looked into Bosch's eyes for that moment, though she knew in reality that she stared at nothing more than a burdensome mask of steel. The judge stood speechless and still, studying her intently, curiously, refusing to allow himself further failure, and yet unable to muster a practical response. Amid the calm, Balthier observed a look of distraction engross Francesca's features. She strained her ears, sensing the sounds of a ship, but finding no evidence of it in reality. An attempt to locate the disturbance by scent ended abruptly with the overpowering odor of mist. No other took notice of her puzzlement, however, all eyes drawn to Bosch as he risked a tranquil step toward Gabranth, sword lowered and voice sympathetic.
This can accomplish nothing, brother.
The judge turned to him, weary and shaken, but could find no words with which to counter. Vaughn and Penella watched closely, leery of Ashalia's resolve.
You want so badly to punish yourself,
Bosch went on.
I know, I did too, after. You made a mistake,
Gabranth said quietly.
I made a choice. Was it really so different?
The mist seemed to grow heavier, but it did not yet rise above knee height. Sound played across its surface like waves of water that thicken and thin against the shore, and somehow the voices of the two brothers almost seemed identical in spite of Bosch's gentility and Gabranth's metallic strain. The judge grew very still, but he spoke with firmness, spurred on by guilt and necessity.
Just what do you hope to accomplish in revisiting this? You have no reason to forgive me, but you know damn well she's forgiven you. Don't be ridiculous,
Bosch replied gruffly.
Anyone can see that you did what you did for Monty's sake. Can't you forgive yourself? Can you?
Bosch set his jaw tightly, a hint of hazel creeping into the jade of his eyes as he turned them away. The creak of armor signaled Gabranth's discomfort, but he continued on, slowly losing his steady facade with each word.
If I can't earn forgiveness, I'll welcome punishment, so long as justice is done. Perhaps I gave up on my duty when Landis fell, but I won't be made useless again. I won't let them take all of Evilise. And what if they do?
Ash snapped.
It's more power in your hands. More power in Vane's hands,
he replied.
One way or another, Lamont will be left to fix this mess. I want only for him to have help in doing so. Nethicite helps no one,
Redis insisted. Finally, a hint of desperation entered Gabranth's tone, though the rigidness of his posture countered it well.
Look at what they've done to your home, Princess, to my home, to our whole world.
Ash averted her eyes, but he continued,
You can make Evilise what it used to be.
And suddenly another voice broke into the conversation,
For God's sake! The lot of you could talk in circles forever.
Off to the side, mist swirling with his steps, Sid entered the domed chamber. The Arcadian ship in which he arrived docked on the expansive ledge beyond. Bolthir adopted a stony expression of conceit while regarding him, and Fran steadied herself, taking only minimal comfort in the revelation that her senses yet served her amid the growing pool of mist. Sid, however, remained focused on Ash and Gabranth, addressing them with casual superciliousness and a far too friendly tone.
In my day, we settled nonsense like this with swords. You.
Ash growled, eyes leveled critically on him as he approached.
Sorry to crash the party, he went on, but I'm afraid it can't be helped.
Gabranth looked to him with gravelly abhorrence, largely unsurprised that he had been caught in the act of betrayal and even somewhat glad for it.
Vane sent you. Indeed,
said Sid,
with the authority to release you from your esteemed services. Your orders were to determine Lady Ashalia's true intent, not to turn her against us.
He tilted his head back knowingly.
My orders from Vane, perhaps. My orders from Lamont were to protect her. And this is your idea of protection?
Ash injected.
Having me wage war on an enemy more powerful than I could ever dream. To have you do otherwise would lead you to your death,
he snapped indignantly.
It would lead you to an alliance with Arcadia,
Sid corrected.
Monty is Vane's only weakness, he's convinced him to hear you out. So he would have Monty believe,
Gabranth added. Ashalia studied Sid for a moment, then with hesitant distrust asked.
Lamont arranged this.
He nodded.
Name the time and place, and Vane will meet with you.
Bolthir turned to her with quick eyes.
Don't, Ash.
She regarded him curiously in turn, receiving confirmation from Gabranth.
Lamont has no power, he can only manipulate yours and Vane's. This is how you speak of your master.
Sid scoffed.
The truth is painful,
Gabranth bit back.
And if I no longer serve him, you can hardly hold it against me.
His self-assured smirk seemed the very mirror of his son's.
I never thought I'd see the day when you would forswear your oaths, but here it is. And all for nothing, it seems,
he replied.
She bowed to Vane's will long before Monty meant to sway her.
Ash scowled. Sid seemed ready to answer, but he turned his head before speaking, as though hearing a distant call over his shoulder. The others followed his rapt gaze as a distortion in the mist signaled Venah's ungodly presence, the clouds gathering and rising, forming a subtly illuminated mound of shadow not far from the Christ. A tremulous parting of the haze revealed the smoky triangular apparition, her shining body wavering in and out of sight, a spectre that dripped and swirled like ink. A minute thrum of whispers flowed from the surface of the sun crest, engulfing the whole of the lighthouse with words that seemed eerily familiar yet unidentifiable, and presently a melodious hiss of consciousness rose above them, Venah's voice weaving listlessly through the billowing mist.
Princess Ashalaya!
Ash fell back a step, drawing Azela's sword with a quaking hand and noting Sid's disinterest in the creature's appearance. Balthier stood to her right, eyes sharp and intense, and Vaughn and Fran stood to her left, Vaughn poised to strike and Fran steadying herself, studying the Aquarian with failing focus. Venah hovered delicately beside the sun crest, seemingly limbless within the shroud of blackened mist.
Do not be afraid, Highness,
she said with a wraith-like hum.
I mean you no harm. I would see you free of Garon's grasp, free from the oppression of human tyrants and far-removed gods. Do not take this power for your own, to wield Nethysite against Nethysite will lead only to mutual ruin. Rather destroy this stone while you can, and allow me to lead you against the Empire and restore the great dynasty of old.
Ash glared, fingers numbing from the crushing grip on her sword.
No doubt you made Vane the same offer.
Venah hovered motionless.
I do not discriminate in my generosity. Honestly, Venah.
Sid stepped in now, his tone calm, but clearly disappointed.
Looking for the highest bidder? I knew you were unscrupulous, but I thought you might at least grant some loyalty to your puppets.
The creature turned to him slightly, her wavering body bending much like a sheet of paper.
I seek to liberate humankind,
she explained.
Which savior chooses to act on my counsel matters not, so long as justice for Ivalice is ensured. Justice is not ours to grant or withhold,
Ash insisted.
Not yours, indeed,
Venah countered,
for mortals fall too easily and too often to their own misguided sense of morality. But I am of a higher consciousness, and I would not bid you strike out of hatred or simplistic retribution.
Ash stepped forward.
And what would you have me do? Offer my country and my people to Vane in the hope he will prove an honorable dictator. I would have you stay your thirst for vengeance and instead deny humankind the use of God-born power.
The Aquarian met the advance with a calm bow, sending a low plume of mist rolling forward to waft against the princess's legs and evaporate around her.
The sun crest is glutted with mist, enough to conquer and subjugate your world for untold generations, but the very existence of such might drives your kind mad with avarice and entitlement. You are a wise species, in spite of your many shortcomings. Do not allow this foolish desire for supremacy to cloud your judgment. I cannot leave my people defenseless,
said Ash. She shook her amorphous head.
Certainly not, Majesty. You do not understand the workings of the stone. Only this one piece of deaffected Nethysite exists, and all others, though cut from it, yet remain inextricably connected to it. All are born of Ivalice's same womb, and destroying the original stone will in turn destroy its shards. You expect me to trust you?
She demanded, chancing a few more bluffing steps toward the floating being.
Haven't you spent years teaching humans how to create our own nethysite?
Vena's voice grew more serene.
A countermeasure to fend off the wrath of my brethren, should it fall upon you before the Sun Crest could be found. Now that you possess the power to eliminate their threat of domination, you have no need of divine defense. I don't believe you. Just hear her out, Princess,
Sid interceded.
If you relieve Vayne of his power, he'll be willing to negotiate with you. You're just as deceived as he is,
Ash replied. Vena ruffled subtly.
It is Garun who deals in deception, my lady. I offer you the disillusionment you need and desire.
The stars had risen over the ocean beyond the arched pillars around the room, and the ethereal glow emitted by Vena's ghostly body and the sun crest behind her served as the lighthouse's only illumination. Bosch remained still while Ash advanced on the Aquarian, Vaughn following warily at her side, but with the others distracted, he now turned to Gabranth and spoke quietly.
You should go while you still can.
He received a metal-shielded glare in return, but before the judge could speak, Penelo stepped in, her voice small and sweet.
Monty needs you.
Pausing to consider her, he grew very still for a moment, and then returned his gaze to Bosch, nodding at the princess as she argued with Vena.
Don't let her do anything stupid,
he said calmly. Bosch irritably averted his eyes, and Gabranth seemed to regard Penelo one last time before turning and silently disappearing through one of the stone archways. Penelo studied him in return, wondering what fascination she drew from Landesian men, but when she saw that Bosch had solemnly returned his attention to the confrontation near the center of the chamber, she took her place between Vaughn and Fran, a few steps behind, as her fencing skills remained considerably lacking.
You're no different from Garun,
Ash went on.
You mean to use us for your own ends?
Bobbing slightly in the air, Vena lessened the glow of her eyes and answered,
I mean only to equalize the powers that control Ivalice. How might humans fight fairly amid the perpetual interference of the gods?
At last, Bolthir joined in, his tone comfortingly cocky as usual.
So, you're only interfering to prevent others from interfering? That makes about as much sense as you and Garun claiming to show humanity the truth about each other.
Vena turned to him with a faint wisp of smoke, her orange eyes momentarily brightening.
Do not perplex the princess any further. A dynast queen needs wise and clever counselors. You are nothing more than a confused little boy who fled from his own genius. Your allegiance does her a disservice. You're awfully quick to name her your dynast queen,
he bit back.
If you really think so low of mortals' judgment, why put us in charge? Mortal Lady Ashalia may be,
Vena hissed,
but she bears wisdom beyond her birth. Her reign will lead humanity into an age of enlightenment far greater than any of her predecessors have yet witnessed.
The creature continued talking, but her words registered only faintly in Ashalia's mind. Loosening her grip on Azela's sword and noting the surge of stiff pain that pulsed through her fingers as she pried each one in turn, the princess pondered distantly why Vena would say such things. She seemed to truly wish the Sun Crest eliminated, yet Ash began to wonder if she should not act contrary to the Aquarian's wishes, if only because she distrusted the species in whole. However, the prospect of destroying all the world's nethysite in one blow gave her a taste of the optimism Bolthir so often encouraged her to entertain, and furthermore, it seemed that to act against Vena would be to act for Garun. She refused to serve either being, but she feared for the future if she made enemies out of them. Faintly, a voice called to her, and she noted with wonder that the crystal now emitted enough light to nearly fill the top of the lighthouse. Sid's voice permeated her thoughts then, and she wondered how long she had ceased paying attention.
Perhaps Vayne will bend to your will under the weight of praise, he was saying, but the further you spread it, the thinner it wears. What are you really up to? Do you truly doubt me after all these long years?
Vina replied heatedly.
Science has always been a pawn of war, he replied. Skepticism makes for the best defense. I thought you were above all that, but you don't care who does your bidding, do you? As long as the ends suit you, any means will do.
Balthier rolled his eyes, his expression bearing more exhaustion than disgust.
Don't get all self-righteous now,
he growled at his father.
You had no problem with her plan when it would plant Vayne on the throne and you among his most loyal subjects.
Sid returned his indignant glare.
Artificial nethicite was supposed to end this war once and for all, and set humanity free. I never thought she'd be rational enough to help me create it only to destroy it. You knew all along what it would do when you finished it?
Balthier asked, eyes briefly betraying his youth.
It was for the greater good,
Sid insisted. Balthier gazed at him uncomprehendingly.
You made your nethicite for this?
Sid said nothing, and he faintly shook his head, continuing in a tone of calm distress.
You've only ever been a tool. Will you two drop it?
Ash interjected.
This isn't the time for petty arguing.
Shimmering, flapping fluidly, Vina looked on her with eager pride.
Can you not see your own skill for arbitration?
She asked.
This world needs one focused on the improvement of intercultural relations and the pursuit of harmony. Your mediation would settle Ivalice's qualms without violence. You would seek harmony through forceful submission of all who disagree with you,
Ash snapped.
What part do you think you have in the affairs of humans, anyway? Let us handle our own fate. Even if it leads you to extinction. It's our risk to take.
The Aquarian lowered subtly, her wavering body growing more reflective as the mist thickened around them.
Please heed me, Ashalia. Together, we can grant your people a lasting and self-sustaining peace. My people don't need your polluted power,
she growled.
My power.
She rose again, hovering only slightly higher so that she once again looked down on the humans.
I am of Garon's race, but there are likeness ends. The Aquaria give humans power to tame them. By turning your back on their stones, you give your species free hand to write its own history.
Ash's gaze did not falter.
At what price?
The creature seemed to hesitate, the blackness of her form darkening against the growing light of the sun crest. Redis looked to Ashalia, and his voice seemed somehow deeper as it carried through the brackish mist.
Pay her no mind, Highness. You have made your choice, but it is worthless if you fail to see it through. Don't let this monster sway you solely because you suspect it of foul play. Indeed,
Vina added,
do not let me influence your judgment. The wisdom and independence you have exhibited in making this decision is monumentally impressive, and through it you have earned my trust. Vayne wields intellect and might, but he would not choose as you have, and thus he cannot be trusted to govern Ivalice. Strike down the stone, that together we may dethrone him and return this land to the splendor it once boasted.
Ash withdrew half a step, the nearing form of the Aquarian blending with the heavy clouds, the edges of her vaguely triangular body blurring in the reflective light, her tail smoky and dreamlike. Vaughn's voice, clear but cautious, broke the silence.
Fran.
All turned to the Viera, who only barely remained visible through the fog. She stood tall and strong, but her ears drooped, and she held her head weakly.
The mist is changing somehow,
she reported. Ash once again leveled her glare on Vina.
What are you doing?
Nothing, she said.
I hold no power over the Sun Crest. Don't give her the satisfaction of concern, Princess,
Sid warned.
Destroy the Nethysite, but do it for your own sake. Vina will sell her idea of peace to whoever is gullible enough to buy it.
Vina glowed brighter, the darkness of her core seeming to absorb the mist and reflect it back threefold.
His loyalty to his emperor outweighs his loyalty to his species. He aided me to give Vayne supremacy, not to bring peace to Ivalice. He makes a better case than you do,
Ash replied.
And in half as many words,
Sid added. Vina flared, edges fluttering rapidly.
What right do you have to act so ungrateful? I sought your aid to help humanity, not to bolster the empire. You corrupted my work,
Sid growled,
just as you corrupted every other part of my life. I won't have you do the same to the rest of the world.
The mist puffed around them hectically, blindingly pale under the power of the Sun Crest, reflecting the stone's radiance in luminous bursts of white that faded into fleeting pinks and blues and lavenders as mirrored images of every portion of the room flickered in and out of sight. Ash could see only those closest to her through the opaque veil of illusion, and in an instant Vina vanished and reappeared several paces closer, morphing menacingly to Sid, flashing waves of color through her form before again falling black.
Need I remind you that your work is my work?
She flared.
Were it not for my guidance, humans would never have learned to weaponize Nethysite, much less create their own. And even so, you have played barely a passive role in this venture. Your son contributed far more to our cause than you ever did.
Balthier drew nearer to his father's side, advancing slightly on Vina.
Not intentionally, I assure you, not that it matters now. Why do you care so much about the dealings of us meager mortals anyway? Trying to settle a bet with Garun? If we're so difficult, why not just let us annihilate each other and start over?
With the dreaded Aquarian distracted, Ash went in search of her guardians. Bosch kept close, as did Retas, but Vaughn had strayed from her side amid the mounting chaos, and as she called out to him, he seemed to answer from several directions at once. His sudden appearance startled her, but she recovered quickly as she realized that Fran had grown faint, leaning on Vaughn and Penelo as they walked her toward the others. She insisted that she could manage, but Ash knew little time remained to them. Trading Azela's sword for Rythwal's, she set out through the mist to find the Nethysite.
Humanity's potential is too precious to waste,
Vina continued, glowering at Balthier with smoldering eyes.
Indeed, you yourself serve as a perfect example, for it was your brilliance that spurred this project forward. Through your effort and intelligence did artificial Nethysite come into existence, and it has surpassed even the power of the Stone of Gods.
Really, the pirate scoffed.
5 minutes ago, I was a confused little boy. And this is your chance to rise above your past failures.
She seemed to gradually abandon the former wispiness of her voice, adopting in its place a raspy rumble.
Intentionally or not, you spurned the gods and brought this madness on your kind, and now you can see it ended. Do you wish to bear witness to the devastation your efforts can wreak? Do you wish to see what the Stone of Man is capable of? I didn't do this,
he answered firmly.
Whatever you created in that lab has nothing to do with humanity, and certainly nothing to do with God.
The images in the mist intensified, shifting, glowing. Though most of the party guarded Ash near the pedestal bearing the sun crest, the distortion of light cast their reflections all about the circular chamber, occasionally creating the illusion that they all stood grouped together. Sound, too, traveled in strange paths, echoing off empty air, disorienting all but Vina. The falsity could not entirely deceive Fran's quick ears, however, and she staggered a few steps from the princess, gazing at Vina accusingly through the deepening veil of mist.
The Nethysite acts by your will,
she said distantly, swaying faintly on flimsy legs. The Aquarian whipped around swiftly, turning sharp eyes on her and speaking in a violent whisper.
You would do well to return to your forest shelter and keep silent.
Penelo took Fran's arm as she lost her balance, and the Viera leaned on her heavily before pivoting and regaining her footing.
The Aquaria control the stone,
she said to Ash, who had approached her from behind to offer aid.
We must destroy it.
At her back, the stone shone in a gamut of swirling colors, eliciting a rattling hum as it vibrated softly against the dais. Suddenly, Ash felt overwhelmingly glad that Balthier had joined her on this journey, for his presence had acclimated her to the trickery of well-crafted double talk. Indeed, she suspected she had nearly built up an immunity to it now. Refusing to let some manipulative, outlandish being twist her resolve, she heaved her sword and made to hew the Nethysite, but her stroke had not even begun to fall when Redas gripped her arm to stop her.
It's beginning to stir,
he explained grimly.
An unlucky blow may trigger it.
Farther in the sea of briny vapor, Balthier turned a victorious glare to Vina.
So what's your plan now? Waste all of the energy stored since Rythwal's time and try again generations later when it's recharged? You think you'll have better luck next time?
The creature ruffled her edges tepidly.
The Christ defends itself, nothing more.
And then, turning to the princess,
you should have stricken while the chance was upon you.
Fran, now fallen to one knee between Vaughn and Penelo, shook her head defiantly.
It's lying. What do we do?
Ash addressed the question to anyone who would hear it, and knew that her eyes grew wide and blue as she searched their faces for answers. Only blank expressions met her inquiry, fading fast as the mist seethed between them.
If you know how to use it,
Balthier said to Vina,
why do you want it gone so badly? I am not activating it,
she rasped.
It acts on its own will.
He glowered even as the mist blurred his vision.
Are you even capable of telling the truth? You mean to guard yourself, but your doubts will only impair you.
She floated forward gracefully, clouds of silver parting before her.
I wished to help humanity escape the darkness of its bloodlust, but I cannot do it alone. We would have made a great team, you and I. We could have ended this war while Gramus yet ruled, and prevented all of this suffering and guilt. Shut up!
Ash called out from somewhere within the mist, her voice only minimally breaking through the dense puffs.
Your perseverance will get you no further with him it got you with me.
Like a curtain of mirrors, the mist closed upon her, at last locking the two groups away from each other, beyond sight and sound. Vina advanced on Balthier and Sid, though neither gave her any ground.
What a great shame that so many bright minds wither in stubbornness. So quit wasting your time on us and get lost,
Balthier snapped.
Ah,
she wisped smoothly,
such high hopes I once had. But you ran, and they with you, and now the hour of your return has come too late. Stay away from him.
Sid stepped in, placing himself between the two, forcing her back slightly if only by the shock of his rebellion.
Whatever aid you would offer, we don't want it. You would manipulate anyone to get what you want.
Vina hung in the air, livid but composed, and a rich shade of crimson began to throb in the drifting curl of her tail, subtly rising, blending with the gleaming black of her torso.
I want only that which Evelise desperately needs, she snarled. Your obstinacy and cowardice have led you far from my guidance. I ought to have known long ago that you would be too selfish to strive for harmony.
Confidence seemed to overcome Sid's expression, and he spoke with a bitter huff that guardedly resembled a sigh.
All these years, he was right to turn his back on you. That must drive you mad, being outsmarted by a human.
The red continued to rise.
In those days, he was too weak to make the sacrifices you and I made for our ambition. But he is grown stronger now, and far brighter than you could ever. What the hell would either of you know about sacrifice?
Balthier had stepped away, but could not yet manage to join the others, could not turn his back on this confrontation. Sid seemed to soften at the demand, but his eyes conveyed helplessness, and his tone fell with a note of pain.
Balthier. Such fervor is squandered on burdens of emotion,
Vina insisted, shining eyes once again focused on the pirate.
If only you would return to Draklar.
Sid took a weak step toward his son.
What your mother did? What she did?
Balthier flared.
Don't kid yourself. It may have been her knife, Sid, but it was you who drove her to use it. Anger can achieve nothing if you cannot harness it,
Vina injected.
Your father has outlived his usefulness, but you will surely surpass him in acumen and skill.
Balthier shook his head.
You've bastardized my work more than enough already. If only you could accept the truth when it comes before you,
she pressed, wing-like edges flapping the mist away.
I have paved your way to eminence, Sid has rejected it, but surely you will seize it before the end. Don't bet on it,
Sid growled.
He's stronger than I am, certainly stronger than you are.
At this, the deepening scarlet that radiated within her flushed through her entire form, and she broadened her posture, rising higher to stare down on them portentously.
How unfortunate! I have enjoyed these years, but it is near done now, and I cannot leave any loose ends.
A violent flash erupted from her core, knocking Balthier to the slick, salty ground and tinting the impassable wall of mist a brutal and terrifying red. The deafening ring that accompanied the outburst filled the room as well, and for a moment all his senses fell dim, and he struggled numbly on the stone floor, sword drawn as though it might do him any good, feeling the cool mist descend upon him in a smothering shroud of ruby-hued light. As the piercing clamor at last began to fade and the mist slowly paled, he thought he heard shouts of confusion sound out from some distant room within the depths of the lighthouse, but his attention quickly flew to the sticky slime that coated his palm. Sitting up and examining it, he came to realize with slow horror that it was not the condensation that moistened the floor, but rather blood that had pooled beside him, his blood, though he himself remained unharmed. In that moment, a shadow formed in the haze, a gold-eyed silhouette looming over him.
Reconsider your options, she whispered. Together, we could serve Evelise well.
Fading in a plume of mist, she at last vanished from sight, and Balthier fumbled in the glowing expanse of whiteness, calling quietly to his father, searching for any sign of life. A hand found his shoulder, strong but waning fast, and although the lustrous vapor stifled all visibility, Sid's voice reached him gentle and clear.
You're right, you know. As usual. Oh, for God's sake,
Balthier groaned feebly.
Why can you only admit that when it's not true? Not true. It wasn't you, it never was.
A multitude of colors sparkled across the opaque screen of mist, but neither paid it any mind. Sid released a gruff laugh, short and weak, but somehow it sounded genuine.
You would exempt me? Have me plead insanity? Don't lower yourself to the point of blaming Venat. Didn't I willing accept her manipulation? Stop. Spend your pity elsewhere.
His grip failed him, his hand falling from Balthier's shoulder and his tone softening to an exhausted sigh.
I'm sorry, Val. You deserved better.
For all its suddenness, the silence seemed to arrive gently, and Balthier at last let out the breath that he'd held for 4 years. He could sense the impending bedlam, but for the moment no action suited him better than sorrowful stillness, and so he allowed it to consume him. Presently, he recognized a hint of relief in his heart, though he could not tell whether it manifested in response to the final gruesome closure he had witnessed or to the pearly puffs of moisture that shrouded his childlike expression of dejection from the others. For their part, the dilemma raged on, and although each felt somehow aware of Venat's departure, they yet knew nothing of Sid's. Retta supported the increasingly ailing Fran, handing her off to Vaughn and Penelo, who squinted desperately through the cloud cover in search of any opening through which they might locate fresh air. The Viera stumbled as Aquarian-born winds encircled the spire, trapping the mist within the confines of the highest chamber. Willowy limbs weak beneath her and ears rolled tightly shut against the din that eluded her human counterparts. She struggled to keep upright, to make her husky voice audible through the haze.
The mist burns.
She wrinkled her nose faintly.
The Sun Crest is releasing its power.
Penelo freed one of her hands while the other supported Fran about the waist, darting to her pocket and producing the little piece of manufacture nethysite.
We need to get her away from it,
she told Vaughn, handing the stone to Fran with the hope that it might intercept some of the energy that bombarded her.
Fran, the ship's not far.
Noting the girl's words with interest, Ash glanced around the great mist-veiled pillars to see that salvation yet lingered within reach. On a ledge jutting from the outer wall of the tower, there sat docked a small Arcadian craft, larger than an Atomos but lighter than the stealth warships that won the Empire so many battles. Sid, she lamented, no longer had need of it. For a moment, she wondered how she could know this with such certainty, but the mist closed then, blocking the ship from her vision, and she decided against questioning such mysteries. The kids underestimated Fran's frailty, and she fell to one knee against the slick stones, clutching the nethysite and flexing her ears in a vain attempt to locate stable orientation. They knelt at either side of her, coaxing her on, but her senses quieted and her mind clouded, and she knew that she had grown too weak to walk. This onslaught proved far worse than what claimed her aboard the Leviathan, for now it seemed to her as if no energy remained at all, not within herself, and not within this mist-glutted room. The strangling fog overcame her will to try, and Penelo's nethysite, gripped painfully in her slim fingers, felt near powerless.
Come on!
Vaughn's voice called out from a direction she could not determine.
We'll help you.
She sensed a funnel of wind beyond the walls of the lighthouse that felt in all ways identical to the aura emitted from the Aquaria, but nothing else registered in her mind, the strength of the Sun Crest blocking all other sensation. She could no longer see the princess, nor Bosch and Retta's, who had been trying to help her, and although she suspected that Sid no longer lived, she sensed no trace of Balthier, alive or dead. He had always understood her better than other humans. The Dalmascan teenagers that aided her acted on concern and kindness, but knew nothing of what she suffered. The Christ would blow soon, and while she felt certain that Bosch would see Ashalia to safety, a fear none would think go after Bolthir crept into her mind, taunting and panic-inducing. Recalling the direction in which she had last seen her partner, and forgetting that the mist surely misled her, she forced herself to take one haggard step, then fell to all fours and gasped for breath, Vaughn and Penelo frantic above her. Elsewhere in the commotion, Bosch and Redas stood on either side of Ash, who had grown pale as she processed the barrage of untrustworthy information that descended upon her. To flee and allow the Christ to release would ensure its survival for many more human lifetimes, granting Vina and Garan another round of their foolish match. Yet to destroy it now would surely mean forfeiture of her life, and her people had no other to whom they might turn.
Ash,
Bosch insisted, close at her side.
We have to get out of here. We have to stop it.
She corrected irritably, her voice somehow fiercer against the fog.
It will take us all out with it.
He bit back. Redas turned to face them both, the sun Christ pulsing nearby and his tone deep and determined.
We cannot wait any longer, Highness. Give me the sword and get out of here.
She reeled around, back to Bosch and eyes alight with the stone's glow.
What? You think I'll just pass my responsibility off on you? Better me than on our progeny,
he replied.
You have greater evils to slay than this. Let me do it for you.
Bosch spoke plaintively from behind her.
Dalmasca needs you, Princess. I can't just leave you here,
she insisted, shaking her head. Redas smiled broadly in reply, shifting his weight with an air of confidence.
What other choice is left to us?
He asked.
You are no good to Evilise dead, and I am of little use alive. Redas!
She scolded.
Just give me the sword,
he continued calmly.
Do what you must, and let me set right what I have allowed to go so horribly wrong.
Ash hesitated, sensing Bosch's anxiety and her own. She had to live, whether she liked it or not. Dalmasca's freedom depended on her, and even were she not royalty, she could surely not let Bosch suffer the loss of another ward, she could not fall victim to the same horror that claimed Raslur. She feared for Bolthir, she had left him to distract that monster, and for Fran as well, though she could vaguely see that the kids tended to her on the floor. Mist blurred the image, and the princess wondered if in fact the three huddled behind her, merely reflected in a cruel illusion. And then she wondered if the sun Christ indeed rested before her, if it was not mirrored from some other room within the lighthouse. With her thoughts so disheveled, she hardly felt herself able to choose between her own life and Redas's, but his eyes pleaded with her in spite of his stonily flippant expression, and she held out Rythwal's sword to him, unaware of her intent until she spoke.
I'm sorry.
Redas smiled as he took the weapon, a grateful but melancholy smirk that conveyed far more emotion than he intended.
Don't apologize, but celebrate. After 2 full years, I can at last make amends.
The genuineness of his expression eased Ash's guilt, but she still felt an absolute coward for allowing another to make such a sacrifice on her behalf. Acrid mist slithered across her skin in an accusatory, creeping motion reminiscent of frenzied insects, and she sought desperately for something to say, but, as always, she came up short. A wave of shameful relief overcame her when the mist stirred and Penelo's voice sounded throughout the chamber.
You have to keep trying.
Bosch and Redas followed Ash's gaze to the unfortunate scene, and she edged forward slowly, unwilling to leave Redes alone with his dreadful task just yet, but also fearful of Fran's withering strength. Vaughn and Penelo managed to haul the Vieira to her feet momentarily, but she could scarcely drag her feet a full step before collapsing once more. Bosch and Ash exchanged glances, hesitantly starting forward, but in that moment a calm call sounded through the haze, its origin unclear, but its tone decidedly reassuring.
Fran!
Balthier emerged from the effervescent pall behind the crumpled Vieira, his expression flushed with mock exhaustion.
Must I do everything around here?
Fran's ears stretched wide, turning toward him in sync with her eyes as he knelt to pick her up.
Well,
said Vaughn,
you are the leading man, aren't you?
Fran forced a petite smirk as he lifted her into his arms, thankful that he arrived in time to spare Vaughn the job, but barely able to voice her gratitude.
I'd say you're in more of a supporting role.
Balthier rolled his eyes.
Fran, please.
Noting his hesitation as the princess ceased her advance, Redes looked to Balthier sternly, raising Rythwal's sword.
Be quick, lad,
he warned.
I'll take you with me if I must.
Balthier replied with only a gaze of mournful respect, then turned to leave, both suddenly grief-stricken kids trailing behind him, just now understanding what would soon occur. Redes set his jaw definitively and tried to ignore Fran's garnet-hued eyes watching him over her partner's shoulder as he carried her through the smothering vapor. Bosch and Ash followed quickly, but she idled at the mist's edge to regard Redes one last time.
Redes! Thank you!
Receiving a consenting gaze in return, she turned and vanished into the shining haze, following the others through the potent gusts of wind beyond. They boarded the ship quickly, Balthier depositing Fran on one of the small cots in the cabin before rushing to the cockpit, and in an instant they took to the sky, struggling out of the wind's grasp and zipping briskly away from the island. The little ship proved considerably cramped compared to the Strahl, but none seemed to mind, Bosch and Ash gathering tightly with the kids at the back window to observe the glimmering lighthouse in the hope that it might remain intact, that the Christ might die peacefully, and they might return for Redes. They received no such luck, however, for the tower erupted in a deafening plume of mist that sent vibrant lavender flames high into the sky. Although the explosion barely licked the trees on the isle below, its fury proved strong enough to cast back the waves of the ocean, exposing the great reef that surrounded the island before the roaring walls of water crashed back over it. Magnesite-rich stone flew in every direction, chunks of the ancient structure blown brutally apart, gleaming like faint meteors as they soared through the darkened night sky. As the raging light at last began to grow dim, a great funnel of fire ripped through the clouds above, vanishing into space, leaving in its wake a pristinely circular hole over the crumbled base of the lighthouse. It seemed to those watching from the small aircraft nearby that the stars had never shone so bright. The ensuing silence distressed them all, even Balthier, distracted in the cockpit, and Fran, half awake in the cabin. Each suffered a piercing ringing that obscured their hearing for several minutes, and they could only gesture helplessly to one another, holding their heads, grimacing wearily. As the stillness settled and the group regained their bearings, Balthier lowered the ship closer to the wreckage, dipping it agilely around the island, flying it over the little jungle and the ancient stone foundation that remained. Thankfully, the waves of force failed to reach the ground at full strength, and thus the Strahl, docked a brief distance from the base of the lighthouse, caught only a small gust of energy that barely blew it into the shallows off the shore. The cortege managed to tow the ship back to land with help from the Minute Arcadian vessel, and seeing that it remained in fair condition and proved far better suited their purpose and number, they boarded it and took flight, leaving the Arcadian ship amid the tragic rubble. Fran slept soundly in the cabin, her ears twitching occasionally, but apparently not picking up enough disturbances to stir her. Penelo, too, fell asleep, after many reassurances from Vaughn, but she fidgeted at the slightest sound, even when her brother promised to stay awake and keep watch. He had given the princess a look of admiration, but he seemed to have acquired an awareness of her discomfort with words, and therefore said nothing to compound the unsettling sorrow of the atmosphere. Bosch had some time earlier left the cabin, and Ash, restless and decidedly lonely, soon followed after him, finding him pacing the hallway that led to the cockpit.
"You only do that when Rassler's in trouble,"
she said quietly, drawing his attention. He paused for a moment, studying her with intense green eyes that quickly softened.
"When Rassler's in trouble, I usually am, too." "Same with your brother?"
she asked. He nodded.
"Except I was the troublemaker."
Turning her eyes down slightly, she felt a twinge of nervousness strengthen within her, heating her face, it seemed, or at the very least forcing more blood to her head than it could lift. Suddenly she felt petty, thinking of what they had witnessed barely an hour ago, or the way she had mentally and verbally berated Bosch for accepting his brother's actions so complacently, or how he had carried her so far with such equine sturdiness and for such meager gratitude. She could remember a time when she would never have second-guessed Bosch's judgment, and now she felt that same faith in him once more, though she did to a certain extent wish for it to once again depart.
"It's all right to hate him, you know,"
he told her in a tone far too gentle for so deep a voice.
"You don't,"
she contended, almost accusingly.
"I've tried."
Her head shook, seemingly of its own volition, and she pouted as her mind reeled, grasping at the perfect words and finding them so glaringly insufficient that embarrassment overcame her for simply thinking of saying them.
"I'd like to think that you would make the same choice for Rassler,"
she admitted deftly.
"Or that Azelas would for me. It used to scare me. I don't know. It's comforting now."
He gave her a questioning gaze as she searched for the proper mode of expression of her sentiment, and he could see in her eyes that she had briefly contemplated who she herself would make such a choice for, though the thought appeared to pass hastily from her heart.
"I'd only be hating a part of you," she continued awkwardly, "and I could never do that, I've tried."
At this, he smiled, almost laughed, and at once she felt justified and consoled. She had thought Monty most unfortunate to have a murderer protecting him, but now she saw it differently. Gabranth had done what most bodyguards only claimed they would do, he had proven that he truly would do anything for Monty. Spurred by sudden recollections of Bosch's loyalty both to her and to Rassler, she tried to continue.
"I know I've been an inexcusable and unmitigated ass. Don't apologize."
Her eyes grew quizzical, though his soft smile put her at ease.
"I wouldn't have you any other way."
Releasing a subdued smirk of embarrassment, she looked to the floor and tucked some hair behind her ear. This seemed to satisfy him, and he headed toward the cabin to join the others, briefly squeezing her shoulder as he went, causing her to notice vaguely that the round mass of bone and muscle seemed tiny and feminine in his enormous palm. She decided against following him, however, instead continuing forward, past the little closet at the side of the hallway and through the door to the cockpit. Bolthier sat quietly in the pilot's seat as usual, but all lights in the room had dimmed, save for a few that blinked faintly from the control panel. He did not hear her, watching the calm stars reflected on the sea as they flitted past, but the slight click of the door latching behind her alerted him to her entrance, and he briefly glanced over his shoulder. Awarding her only minimal regard, he turned his gaze back out the window.
Shouldn't you be off somewhere demoralizing Bosch?
She shrugged.
Got old fast.
His eyes remained trained on the horizon, and he said nothing. Seeing that her admittedly pathetic jest had done nothing to cheer him up, she sat in the co-pilot's seat with awkward hesitance and guardedly observed his expression from the corner of her eye. For too long her emotions had been well kept within her, and she simply could not find the right words to express her concern, but after several painstaking moments, she at last concluded that his well-being outranked her comfort, and haltingly tried to speak.
Bolthier. I'm fine.
She paused and chewed her lower lip for a moment, then warily placed her hand on his. At first, he appeared to ignore it, and she mentally debated leaving him be, but then his hand turned slightly, and his fingers interlaced with hers, and, slowly, the pain began to dissipate.